My name's Mark Ludlow. I'm the Brisbane Bureau Chief for the Financial Review. Today, the Queensland Media Club has got a very special guest, Dr Andrew Forrest, who's the Chairman and Founder of Fortescue Metals Group, Fortescue Future Industries, Minderoo Foundation and Tattarang. As Founder and Chairman, Andrew's led Fortescue Metals Group from its inception to a $60 billion listed natural resources company that's invested $40 billion developing some of the world's most efficient infrastructure. In 2021, Fortescue announced it's committed to become zero emissions by 2030 and created Fortescue Future Industries, which we call FFI, which is going to develop, finance and operate a global portfolio of renewable energy resources, including hydrogen, which I'm sure Andrew's going to be talking a lot about today. But before he speaks, can you please welcome Stephen Miles, Queensland Deputy Premier, who's going to introduce him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're gathered on and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge my ministerial colleagues, Mick de Brenny, the Minister for Energy, and Di Farmer, our Minister for Skills. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to address the Queensland Media Club and to introduce Dr Andrew Forrest AO. As Mark mentioned, last year, Fortescue announced their commitment to become zero emissions by 2030 through the creation of Fortescue Future Industries. I'm so glad Dr Forrest invited me to join him here today. The idea of using hydrogen to store energy is not new. In fact, it's already being done right now. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. It's found in water molecules and various organic compounds. It's already used as a critical ingredient in the chemical industry, creating things like explosives and fertilizer. Soon, it will be the critical industry in creating something else, jobs. In a decade's time, hydrogen electrolyzers will be as ubiquitous as solar panels are today. It is the oldest element in the universe and Queensland's newest opportunity. Two big shifts over the last 5 years have meant the moment for renewable hydrogen is crystallising right in front of us. The first shift is the massive growing global appetite for decarbonisation. A decade ago, global commitments to net zero were just an idea. By 2018, just 5 countries had committed to it. Just 4 years later, it has increased to almost 140 countries. There has not been as fundamental a global economic realignment in such a short time since the end of the Second World War. The second is the huge decline in the cost of providing renewable energy. Last decade, the cost of electricity from solar dropped almost 6-fold, and that's without including any subsidies. The combination of those two things means that renewable hydrogen is an idea whose time has come. The world has reached agreement that we desperately need to switch to low emissions right at the point where we have technology that helps us make it possible. 3 years ago, the Premier met with businesses and academics in Japan to talk about the potential to export Queensland's sunshine as hydrogen. The following year, we released our hydrogen strategy. Then we appointed a Minister for Hydrogen, a world first. Last year, we launched the Renewable Energy and Hydrogen Jobs Fund, a $2 billion commitment to grabbing the opportunities that are coming from clean energy. The fund is part of the $3.34 billion Queensland Jobs Fund. Now, because we moved quickly to secure future jobs, because we didn't wait for others, because we saw the opportunity and made the partnerships needed to get the most of it, we are now seeing the benefits. In March last year, we signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Sumitomo Corporation for a Gladstone hydrogen ecosystem. It was the first major step in providing the supply chain and domestic market for hydrogen. In September, our partnership between publicly owned Stanwell and Iwatani, Japan's largest hydrogen supplier, was expanded to include 4 additional partners to undertake planning to tap into the hydrogen export industry. Then in October, Dr Forrest and the Premier announced a new partnership, bringing FFI to Aldoga near Gladstone to create a world-leading hub to manufacture electrolysers. Today, FFI and publicly owned Powerlink and Economic Development Queensland signed an agreement to connect Gibson Island and Aldoga to Powerlink's transmission network to allow renewable electricity to power FFI's Queensland developments. What FFI are doing is really impressive. They understand that in a moment where renewable hydrogen's time has come, you can choose a small slice or you can try for the whole pie. FFI are choosing the whole pie. And they're choosing to do that here in Queensland. There are many places around the world where FFI could seize this moment, but they chose Queensland. Queensland has a long and proud history of converting our natural advantages to economic advantage. That advantage, like sunshine, spills into every region, every community, every day through jobs. It's our history of mining in Mount Isa and Moranbah, tourism on the Gold Coast and in Winton, agriculture in central Queensland and the Cape. It's using the deep water of Gladstone Harbour to build one of the strongest industrial hubs and one of the best multi-commodity ports in the world. We do this because we are in the business of generational uplift, ensuring every young Queenslander has an even better life ahead of them thanks to the work that we do today. We are resolutely committed to ensuring that our kids inherit a state with even more opportunity than we had. Many inputs go into that, and over time they change. But one key output remains constant decade after decade: good, well-paying jobs. So why did FFI choose Queensland? Because we have the right combination of everything needed: sun, wind, land, water, good, clever, industrious people with expert knowledge, and a government committed to creating a renewable hydrogen industry. Queensland is not merely seeking our fair share of the jobs as part of the energy transition pie. We want every slice we can get. We don't just want to invest in renewable energy so we can ship it overseas. We want to capitalise on this cheap, clean energy boon to encourage local large-scale manufacturing. Right now, Australia is supplying nearly 50% of the world's lithium ore at a value of about $130 million. But we don't supply any of the refined product suitable for battery cells. If we did, the value of that product would be $2.2 billion. That's a lot of jobs. At the beginning of a golden decade of opportunity for Queensland, we have put the foundations in place to leverage our traditional strengths and build a state that will thrive in the global transformations ahead. Fundamental to our strategy is setting ourselves up to secure a greater share of the value chain of growth industries, to make more of what we need here at home so we control the resources, we control their destiny, and we reap the benefits of converting them into what the world needs. So we don't just export our energy and raw materials to other countries, creating jobs there and products we then have to buy back. We are determined to make sure Queensland's next energy boom delivers jobs for Queenslanders. So pick a year in the future, any year. Let's say 2032. The year the world will celebrate the climate-positive Brisbane 2032 Olympics. Queensland will be looking back and seeing how our natural resources powered some of the first mass-produced electrolysers. We'll see how our people built and operated the production facilities that shipped them to the world. And we'll see how our people and communities are enjoying the benefits thanks to us seizing this opportunity now. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr Andrew Forrest. Welcome back to Queensland Twiggy, and thank you for partnering with us on this future.
Thank you, people of Queensland, for having me. Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Deputy Premier, I need to probably get this out there quickly. There is wind and solar everywhere. The hydrogen and ammonia markets, which will put the oil industry in its pocket, will still be a finite industry. The difference, what draws us to countries around the world, isn't necessarily solar and wind or geothermal or hydro. It's leadership. Leadership will be the ingredient that drives the future of what will become the world's biggest industry. You won't have this huge birthright of gas reservoirs or oil reservoirs. Your birthright will be what you vote for, and that'll be leadership. So allow me to thank the Queensland Media Club for hosting myself and the Deputy Premier at really such short notice, and thank you for turning out today. And as you know, as you would expect, all of us, but particularly mine personally, our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Ukraine. I kind of felt I should stay at home. I went to Crimea and Putin invaded it. I went to Ukraine, and as you've seen what's happened, I went to Afghanistan before the Taliban, so maybe I should just stay at home. But I speak lightly of what is something really horrific. We woke today of pictures of a full-scale invasion and a frightening new world. The road Russia is taking is one where Vladimir Putin places himself as the great invader to his mentor, the person he looks up to, the Russian Peter the Great. If he can conquer a neighbouring country, well, you'd wonder what will he stop at. Once you as a leader have lost the wisdom of humility, there is nothing to restrain your ego. Putin's plans, ladies and gentlemen, put simply, is to destroy Ukrainian human freedom and the dignity we all take for granted. And what powers his weapons, his missiles, and rain down on innocent citizens, people just like us, is not different to what brings you and I together today. It's energy. In particularly Russia's case, the power of economic energy. Europe is in the midst of a freezing winter. Russia's actions are already driving the price of fuel up, affecting the ability of people all over Europe to warm their homes and the ability of business to power their industries. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, I want to be in Queensland with you. Australia must become fully energy independent. I spoke of leadership, ladies and gentlemen. Here in Australia, the federal government is telling us we can ride this one out with adequate supplies of oil and gas. Maybe. Maybe we will this time. But what if we don't? The Deputy Premier spoke of your kids. Are you willing to gamble your future and their future on the whims of people like Putin? We cannot and we must not keep relying on foreign fuel imports to keep our country running, our hospitals, our schools, our homes and our industries. We must create our own energy for our own land from the wind and the sun, and to build a new ecosystem of green industries around it that is fed purely by 100% renewable electricity. Green hydrogen and green ammonia can fully replace every form of fossil fuel, and the employment demand will be greater than what we have now. So those worried about losing their jobs need not. I remember when we fully automated Fortescue, we had 12,000 people working for us. And the automation was super successful, and a barrage of cynicism that would lay off all these people. Actually, ladies and gentlemen, we have well over 17,000 people working for us now. We're a much larger, much more efficient, growing strongly company and supporting strong and prospering local communities. Let's go further afield to Inverness. Let's really put this one to bed. Inverness in Scotland, where workers were dreadfully worried about the turn against fossil fuel, where they used to service offshore oil and gas platforms, which are now all out of service. These are the very same electricians, fitters and turners and general workers who are invaluable resource, our fellow Australians who can build our nation. And we need you even more now. Our long-term future is green energy and industry, be it offshore and onshore. Same for Scotland, same for every nation in the world which has great leadership. Same for Australia, I trust, and certainly for Queensland, I know. So let's really drive our economy and our employment and our energy independence right here at home. We must become the Russia, not of gas. That's paralysing Europe. But of green hydrogen right here in Australia. We must become the Saudi Arabia, but not of oil. But of green ammonia, but right here in Australia. We must become the China and Japan of green iron and steel, but right here in Australia with green hydrogen and green ammonia made also right here. We can do it, ladies and gentlemen. I seek your conviction, your fellow belief, and your demand of our leaders to lead. And we must export not only our energy, but our philosophy of freedom, our commitment to a free press, and our democracy with it, so you cannot spread the propaganda which is running through Russia right now, somehow justifying the merciless desecration of the freedoms of people just like us, but not born here. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a pivotal moment in history. There's been never a time quite like this. If we don't take this opportunity, we will lose it. As the Australian wrote today, the revolution, the green revolution, is here. Australia needs to get on board and seize the opportunity. The reason I am here today in Queensland with you is because you are already that leader in the green industrial revolution, and a state that is taking advantage of the massive opportunity that sits in front of us all. On Sunday, I will share with the people of Queensland and Australia an announcement that will enable us to accelerate towards our energy independence, particularly here in Queensland, and will demonstrate through action the deep conviction that you can recognise in me today. The economics, ladies and gentlemen, are finally on our side, and that is why we're acting at FFI with such tenacity, speed, and at serious scale. This week, Australia's largest coal-fired power plant announced it was shutting down in 2025, 7 years ahead of schedule. The CEO of Origin Energy, which owns the plant, said, and I quote word for word, "The reality is the economics of coal-fired power stations are being increasingly put under pressure, unsustainable pressure by cleaner and lower cost generation, including solar, wind and batteries." Despite the flack that Frank Calabria then got from Minister Angus Taylor, he had the guts to tell the truth. This is the same flack that responsible directors of AGL received when they announced they were shutting down coal-fired power stations as well. When the coal sector itself says that, you know the end has well and truly come. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a political animal. Bill Shorten once remarked, "You never know which way Forrest votes, but I can tell you this, he votes for good policy." And that's my strong point about Minister Taylor and his very strong rear vision glasses. In studiously supporting fossil fuels, he's standing in the road of both the market, never a wise decision, and the concluded science of climate change. What bothers me most, that this rear vision loyalty is standing in the road of Australia's real and proper destiny, one that you're feeling and witnessing and leading here in Queensland. a destiny of becoming a pollution-free nation, exporting pollution-free products and fuels, all on a scale to dwarf the industry you know I'm from, which is the iron ore industry. Minister Taylor seeks to stand not only in front of the market and admonish coal companies as they face their uncertainty, but also to accelerate the death of the natural ecosystems we know through not taking responsibility to combat climate change. I don't play politics, but I will call out policy that is not supported by science. The Trumpian era of being the loudest in the room and overlording scientists is gone. We must call it out. Minister Taylor, I believe, pays lip service to green energy, but takes action for fossil fuels. Why else would we go through the macabre pretense of turning fossil fuel into so-called clean hydrogen, when the result creates more emissions than burning the fossil fuels in the first place? And then take out national advertisements proclaiming your green credentials, championing fossil fuel, made hydrogen, to try and fool us all. It really makes me ask the question, ladies and gentlemen, what's the difference between Angus Taylor and God? And I answer it, God doesn't think he's Angus Taylor. But take this seriously, ladies and gentlemen. The biggest threat emanating from Russia starts with P, but it isn't Putin. That's bad enough. We will ultimately fix Russia with sanctions, financial isolation, and expulsion from the SWIFT monetary system, and if necessary, military might. But the only way we will stop Russia's permafrost invading us all is to stop using fossil fuel. Let me explain the Russian permafrost. Most of you, I think, would not have heard of it. It's a belt of frozen organic matter and dangerous greenhouse gases that is approximately 2.5 times the size of Australia. And can I be really clear? This is the biggest threat facing our planet. And I'm very sure, like me only a little while ago, some years, you can be excused for knowing nothing about it, but the science is breaking on it. The permafrost wraps around the Arctic like a murderous necklace, releasing slowly at first, then quickly, greenhouse gases and worse, methane. Methane is 80 to 90 times more dangerous as a global warming agent than its relatively pathetic little brother, the one we're also stressed about, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide for us is like getting a suntan compared to methane. That's like going into an incinerator. You probably know, very clever marketing. Liquid natural gas is 95% methane, which when you burn it, converts to carbon dioxide. Not so bad. Bad enough to cook us all. But when it's released to the atmosphere as fugitive emissions, particularly in the making of hydrogen, or in the gas industry, and worse, in that fossil fuel sector downstream to make other products, then it becomes seriously dangerous. We're safe while it stays frozen in the ground. But ladies and gentlemen, the permafrost used to, but now is not staying frozen. We wonder why the Arctic has heat waves of 38 degrees, which of course is no precedent. If we had a precedent, there would be no Arctic. Does the proximity to the ring of permafrost explain why the Arctic is warming? 400 to 500% higher than the rest of the world's atmosphere. The Antarctic, our close neighbour, isn't yet, but it's not surrounded by a huge belt of permafrost, approximately 65% of the Russian landmass, which you probably know if you jumped on a plane in Kamchatka and flew to Moscow, take you about 9 hours. That's how big it is. Science is looking very hard at permafrost to try and explain this frightening phenomenon, and perhaps we should look no further than the workers of Norilsk Nickel, the world's largest nickel company and one that is based in the permafrost in Russia. Many of these workers from Norilsk are no longer with us. Why? Last year, a large part of their plant collapsed into the permafrost. Initially, both the company and the government agreed it was due to permafrost becoming unstable as it melted. Frozen matter like permafrost has very high tensile strength when it's frozen. Great for building, but terrible if it melts. No one considered it would melt. No one considered the reality of global warming. Then the government quickly said, and I ask you to consider the current state of propaganda emerging from Russia in this statement, that it wasn't the permafrost at all. Don't look here, world, there's nothing to see when it's all exploding over here. Instead, they blamed Norilsk Nickel for not obeying building codes that piling had to go down to bedrock. The little problem with that airbrush is that at the time it was built, there was no such code. And in places, the permafrost is over 1 kilometre deep. So theoretical anyway. Under the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, A1B scenario in which emissions peak in 2030 and then decline, the melting of the permafrost could increase the cost of climate change by an additional $43 trillion. I say to my colleagues in the fossil fuel sector, if your kids don't matter enough, maybe the $43 trillion will. That number won't just bankrupt Russia. Like the permafrost, it will come after us as well. We have no system to stop the lifeline of Russian missiles. We only have our leadership to convert the world to non-fossil fuels, keep us safe and free from the grips of the other P, Putin and the permafrost. We need to exit coal by 2030 to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, according to the International Energy Agency, and we simply cannot act quickly enough to phase out coal and fossil fuels. Ladies and gentlemen, we will break ground on Sunday on the world's biggest electrolyser plant. Look at your glass of water. Shoot electricity into that, it'll split to pure hydrogen and oxygen using renewable electricity, a huge source of infinitely sustainable power, a power source which comes from water, creates a huge amount of energy and goes back to water. I reckon Hogwarts, Harry Potter, eat your heart out, that's the best spell I've heard of. Demand for electrolysers is forecast to quadruple this year. The trend is your friend, ladies and gentlemen. By 2023, 1 year from now, we intend to be manufacturing affordable electrolysers at scale in Gladstone all over Australia. In fact, the first electrolysers that come off the production line from Gladstone are earmarked for our green ammonia facility right here. You can see it, Gibson Island in Brisbane, where we're converting Incitec Pivot's fertiliser factory to run on, you guessed it, green hydrogen, not fossil fuels, to bring down the cost of fertilisers to Queensland farmers. Just this morning, I signed the agreement the Deputy Premier spoke of with Powerlink to progress transmission connections that will supply Gibson Island plant with that renewable electricity. And beyond green ammonia and green shipping fuels, we and a diversity of other businesses will be able to use that green hydrogen throughout Queensland industry, from trucking and aviation to fertiliser, green metals and chemicals. Yet only a decade ago, none of this would have been achievable. But today, the economics are on our side. By 2025, the green hydrogen is projected to hit cost parity with fossil fuel. That's around the corner. And in many regions, it will trigger an explosion in uptake and applications. Ladies and gentlemen, we need Queensland to lead. We need Australia to help its regions. That's what hydrogen can do. It all comes down to making the right decision now. The right decision is to invest in green energy and green hydrogen because it's the real solution to permanently stop global warming while creating economic choice. The other option, to keep burning fossil fuel and pretend we can just bury the emissions underground in that failed technology, carbon and capture storage, is like taking a Panadol or a placebo when you have a fatal disease. It does nothing to stop the disease and at best gives you a false sense of security. A study first published in 2020 found more than 80% of carbon capture and storage projects in the United States had either failed to launch or failed after launch. And it's excruciatingly expensive. I ask you all to take a long, hard look at CCS and ask yourself why, when the science and the economics clearly say no, why we're being asked to endorse a technology and often have you, the taxpayer, pay for it. We've been blowing up this money with successive new governments for more than 20 years, and still the oil and gas industry peddle it out as an environmental solution. As I wrote recently in a letter to our government, CCS was pioneered by Prime Minister Rudd and championed by Prime Minister Turnbull, but all experienced players without a vested interest, like Messrs Turnbull and Rudd now, acknowledge that is not in any way a climate solution, and it's quickly failing to be a political solution as well. Just as no one believes in cancer-free tobacco or, worse, vaping, voters aren't going to fall for clean coal or clean fossil fuels much longer, and certainly not clean hydrogen made from fossil fuels. Whichever way you cut it, CCS is designed by the fossil fuel industry to suppress the economic and catalytic impact of the green industry's growth. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Queensland's growth. That is Australia's growth. That is your jobs and your children's future. And this is why we must fight global warming, and this is why it is not an overstatement to state that what we achieve in Queensland has implications for not just our economy or Australia's economy, but for all of humanity, as Queensland sets that example. So, I'm a bit of a fan of Queensland, right? So you probably noticed. Thank you, Peter Miles. But let me turn to that particular Peter Miles, one of our Queensland's finest but most forgotten poets. His poetry inextricably links the wind to Queensland identity. He wrote of being able to identify trees based on the way the wind sang, the way they creaked and roared and rustled in the wind. He wrote of being enveloped by the wind as he lay in the sun like a blind man in great folds of pure silk. For him, the wind and the sun were part of Australia's identity and a power that will always shape it. There's no doubt in my mind that is true, ladies and gentlemen. As true as the future is ours to shape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Nice to meet you. The Deputy Premier's grabbing a seat as well. Thank you for both of your speeches, especially you, Andrew. There was a lot to unpick in that, and thank you for the Angus Taylor quote. I'm not sure whether you've used it before, but it's secured my headline for tomorrow anyway, so it's one less thing I've got to do back in the office. Look, there's a number of points here. I'm not sure you haven't spoken to the Queensland Media Club before. I'll start off with a few questions as my prerogative as MC, and then we shall throw to my colleagues on the media table. Unfortunately, other people can't ask questions unless you slip a note to some of the working journalists at the table. Obviously, the big focus in the last few months, and obviously overnight, has been Ukraine and Russia. You mentioned there, it's interesting about, obviously there's the energy factor in there, obviously gas to Europe, all that kind of stuff. And you turned it around and you're talking about the need for Australia to be fully energy independent. I know you've been been a long spruiker of hydrogen, green ammonia, and you obviously see that as Australia's future. A lot of this technology is in the early stages. I know it's feasibility studies, all that kind of thing. And you say Australia needs to wean itself off fossil fuels, even from a fuel security point of view. How long are we talking? Are we talking it's going to take until the 2030s before those kind of technologies can replace existing fossil fuels?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, let me conclude, then pedal back. The conclusion is that by 2030, if we have the leadership for Queensland across our nation and in every state, we will have a country which is rapidly becoming energy independent, where the steps have followed the plans, and many or most are taken. But by 2030, all the other planned steps are predictable, you can see them, and you're on your way to a nation which is fully energy independent and a great worldwide exporter. So that's the conclusion of the future I can see. I think trust a little what someone says about a man, trust a lot more what they say about themselves perhaps, but trust a lot what they do. And I've fully committed a really successful Australian company. It's been the standout performer for total shareholder return by a couple of 100% over the last 20 years. And I've committed that company to a totally renewable future and to become a major hydrogen ammonia exporter. And that's on the back of CSIRO technology, which gave us that plan B to have hydrogen convert to ammonia and then split it back out again at point of destination. And with that plan B, we soldiered straight into the global hydrogen industry. Now, are there better technologies to get straight to your question? Yeah, there are. You know, there's 3 universities working on solar panels which drop the electrolyser and go straight to hydrogen. We want to back all 3 universities. Back every horse in the race. These are great emerging technologies. Are we relying on them? No. The world's going to need a huge amount of electrolysers from water, for hydro, geothermal, of course, wind. But yeah, these technologies are emerging.
I know there's been a lot of announcements by you and by other people around the world about the potential for hydrogen. One thing that was exciting about the announcement about the electrolyser factory in Gladstone is actually the rubber's hitting the road. You know, I think you're going up there on Sunday for a sod turning ceremony. Obviously, can you give us a brief outliner to, I guess, the audience exactly what electrolyser does? And I did want to clarify, will your factory there be building the full electrolyser or will it just be a component in a part of an electrolyser?
Yeah, no, it'll be doing it lock, stock and barrel. Electrolysers used to cost around $1.2 million a megawatt. That's, of course, 1.2 billion a gigawatt, and the world we're going into speaks of gigawatts because you need a huge amount of electricity. We intend to build electrolysers for a fraction of that, from why to go. We need a truckload of electricity, which is why we're being very nice to the power companies of Queensland, because we need to test these electrolysers first before we ship them to us or our customers around Australia and around the world. Say we can produce them for, say, $300,000. That's a saving of 800 billion per gigawatt, so 800 million per gigawatt. So, you know, this is a collapsing cost of electrolysers. I believe everyone will come to Australia for electrolysers at that point. And you've had Mukesh Ambani and others talk a fairly big game about also getting really big into electrolysers. But what I'm really proud of is that, as you say, on Sunday, the rubber hits the road.
I've got one more question for you before I throw one to the Deputy Premier and then to my fellow journalists. Obviously, the other big story of the week was the AGL takeover. This is a corporate story, sorry guys. AGL takeover. It was very important for us in the Fin Review, I must say. The takeover bid by Mike Cannon-Brookes and Brookfield for AGL. You know, as you would appreciate, when a billionaire speaks, people tend to listen. And Mike Cannon-Brookes has become a bit of a renewable energy warrior, so to speak. it's quite significant that they're making a play for Australia's largest power company, and most significantly, bringing forward the closure dates for coal-fired power stations. I know for a lot of people following the debate, talking about the transition out of coal seemed like something in the distance, but Origin's announcement a couple of weeks ago where they were closing their Tattarang plant by 2025, and this AGL takeover bid, which would be closing their 2 big plants by 2030, is, it's happening moment. It's getting very close. I just wanted to ask you a question. Obviously, there's people such as your friend Minister Taylor who are claiming that prices are going to be going up and the grid can't cope. Do you believe that it's feasible that these coal-fired power stations can close by the end of the decade? And the second part of the question is, will that sort of accelerate certain other projects of yours, such as the green ammonia or green hydrogen?
Yeah, okay, there's a lot in that question and a lot of statements. Let me just say, I've looked at AGL very closely for a very similar strategy. The acquisition cost is part of it. You need to write out a ticket pretty quickly after that of well over $10 billion if you're going to convert everything to green. But if you can do that, and I don't think the AGL shareholders are up for that, then it's a really clever acquisition. And I don't believe Brookfield have any issue with writing a cheque like that. I think they'd actually like to, because there would be a yield on it. And with interest rates where they are, and they've got 700 plus billion under management, they're looking for yield. So I think AGL represents for them a great opportunity, and as I've just admitted to, one which I've looked at for a long time. But Graham Hunt, the chairman, through Felicity Underhill, the head for Queensland here, invited us in to convert Liddell and other stations to green, invited us in the front door. So we downed pens and said, let's be friends.
You're not tempted to make a counter bid then, to come over the top of Mike Cannon-Brookes?
I wouldn't want to dilute tomorrow's headline, mates.
More headlines the better, I'm afraid, Twiggy. I've got a quick question for the Deputy Premier. Obviously, one thing I found interesting in this whole debate was about coal-fired power stations being brought forward. One thing that didn't get mentioned in the whole mix is the youngest fleet of coal-fired power stations are actually in Queensland, and they're owned by the state government. I know the Queensland government has their own ambitious targets for 50% renewable by 2030 and committing to net zero by 2050. One consequence of a fast tracking of this transition process is that Queensland's going to be sitting there with these fleet of younger, I should say, coal-fired power stations. Do you think it's inevitable that the Queensland government is going to have to fast track the closure of these plants themselves?
Well, I think there's two ways of thinking about our ongoing public ownership of not just our generators, but the transmission network. One is, as you've pointed out, Mark, the potential financial implications, but the other is the ability for us to plan and manage that process. And I know Mick is doing a lot of work on an energy plan that will come out later this year, and that will outline how we see that unfolding. But you can't blame an Origin or an AGL for acting in their own interest. That's what their shareholders demand of them, in the absence of a policy framework from a government that would have them do any otherwise. And the benefit we have here in Queensland is, in owning those assets, we will be able to plan and manage that transition, I think, in a much smoother way, even in the absence of that federal policy engagement, which of course we hope will come to.
Just back to the original question, if you look at some of the Queensland plants, I can't remember the exact date. Some of them go out to the mid-2040s, or at least 2042, 43 kind of thing. Queensland government, because it owns these assets, can wear the loss of profitability of them in the same ways that an Origin or an AGL can't. So do you think it is likely that they will have 5 or 7 or 10 years knocked off their life?
Well, again, that'll be outlined in the energy plan, but the opportunity we have is, as you say, not being as profit driven in the operation of them, and that gives us an ability to manage that transition much more closely, as I say, in the absence of the kind of market mechanism and policy framework that we think probably should be there but isn't.
Look, I could ask questions all day, but I don't want to be accused of hogging them. So I might throw to my colleagues on the media table, if you could just stand up, say where you're from and ask the question. Thank you.
Hello, Rachel Rieger from the ABC. Thank you for your time, Dr Forrest. I just wanted to ask, the Queensland Government's current admissions target is to achieve a 30% reduction by 2030. This was set in 2017. We're now being eclipsed by New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, the ACT and Tasmania. It's also similar to the federal government's target of 26 to 28%. You've spoken a lot about leadership. I wondered, would you urge the federal government and the Queensland government to review these targets and be more ambitious in 2022?
Well, that's a Dorothy Dixer. Thank you for the question. No, of course, I look forward to meeting you. Yes, of course. Look, I'm not in politics. I'd say, just looking around Queensland, there's so much happening. Even Queensland publicly owned coal-fired power stations. Right? We're begging the question: should we bring forward the life or the end of life of these coal-fired power stations? Well, yeah. I certainly would if it's going to be more profitable to have green-fired power stations, just leave the coal in the ground. That's going to be better for Queensland taxpayers. Where the Queensland government makes a call as to 2030, I think they're managing the state super well. I think they're probably harbouring a bunch of good news and being good politicians. They're going to announce it when it suits them.
Yes.
Next question.
Hello, Claire Barnes from the 10 Network. I had a question for Twiggy. You said that leadership is the ingredient which drives the future. I realise you've made some pretty strong comments about Minister Taylor, and you said you're not a political animal. But with the federal election coming up, which leader do you think is best placed to lead renewables and hydrogen?
Yeah, that's a classic question. Look, I'm just simply not going to answer that. Thank you. If I was a politician, I'd be on the public person and say, look, I've got to answer it, right? But no, look, can I just say that I believe Australia has a monumental opportunity to be, as you've heard me say, the Japan and China of iron and steel, the Saudi Arabia but of green ammonia, which can fire the world's entire shipping industry. We chop through 750,000 tonnes of hydrogen equivalent in bunker sea oil in the shipping industry every few days, right? And we burn so much hydrogen equivalent just in petrol and everything else. All of it can be replaced with technology we have today. Of course, it can improve, but with technology we have today, it can be completely replaced with ammonia, with hydrogen, and its derivative products. So all I'd say to both leaders, stand on the hose of this future. When it becomes absolutely clear you're standing on the hose of the future of every Australian, then get used to opposition.
Dr Forrest, Hayden Johnson from the Courier Mail, thanks for your address. You said in it that Queensland was already a leader in the green industrial revolution. Just wondering, can you sort of compare Queensland's approach with southern states, and do you believe that Queensland's leadership will be challenged by other states in the future for investments like yours?
Yes, it could well be challenged. We're seeing a lot of action from other states as well, but I'm a really proud Australian, and if you want me to pick a favourite state, it'd be like picking a favourite child, mate. Not going to happen.
Twiggy, John McCarthy in Queensland. You mentioned Gibson Island earlier. I understand that's under feasibility study at the moment, but what is your confidence level of that going ahead?
High.
Can you expand on that?
Look, it got a lot more confident when we signed with the Treasurer an agreement to proceed. We need a lot of power coming into that huge fertiliser facility, which has hundreds of people, great Queenslanders, worrying about their careers and their future, and we need even more power going into Gladstone. And that's all in all a really good thing. There's billions of dollars going into renewable electricity, almost more supply than demand. That's a really high-class problem, because once you bring a hydrogen industry in here, because you've got access to electrolyzers, then you've got an ability to replace oil and gas, and that is of course, a huge market. The difference between Queensland and that huge market is not solar and wind. It's leadership.
I think, is that all the questions from the media table? I think we're pretty much wrapped up there, but I will throw one last one at Andrew while I've got you here. Obviously, you're talking about Australia's fuel security. There's the LNG import terminal at Port Kembla as one of the many projects you've got on the go. I'm sure you lose track of all the different projects that are on the go. How is that progressing, and have customers been locked in for that one?
No, we're really furious believers in hydrogen as a gas to be the biggest imported and exported product in the world. So, as you can say, judge what a man does more than what he says. We're putting everything we can into creating a hydrogen industry. At this point in time, we're going to need a hydrogen export facility. I hope it will be finished in time to take hydrogen. If it's finished early, if there's a huge need for LNG, we'll put up with it, but it's being built out as a hydrogen-targeted port and importation-export facility to empower New South Wales.
No worries. That's what Queenslanders love to hear. Thank you, Andrew Forrest and Stephen Miles. Please put your hands together. Thank you.